In this part of the tutorial, we would like to walk you through the different components that comprise the Eucalyptus architecture. Eucalyptus being an on-premise private cloud platform, it's a distributed system. A couple of these Linux-based processes interacting with each other form the cloud layer. Some of these components, to begin with, at a very high level, include the cloud controller, the cluster controller, node controller, the storage controller, and Walrus. The cloud controller is the front end or the entry point to the Eucalyptus cloud. That's also the one which exposes the Amazon Web Services or Amazon AWS compatible interface to the end users. And cloud controller is also the one which exposes an administrative interface for the administrator to manage images, manage users, manage groups, and in general, the infrastructure management aspect of it, like the storage, the network, the clusters, and so on and so forth. The second component is called the cluster controller, which is the front end or the entry point to a cluster. Your Eucalyptus cloud itself could be sliced into multiple clusters, and there are various reasons why you may want to have multiple clusters. One, you have multiple hypervisors, and Eucalyptus can overlay on top of different kinds of hypervisors like Xen, KVM, or VMware, and these hypervisor environments can appear as different clusters in your Eucalyptus cloud. Second reason is you have your IT infrastructure distributed across different data centers, and you'd like to have a single cloud management layer overlaid on top of this distributed data center. And Eucalyptus lets you do that through the multi-cluster mode, and these data centers now appear as different clusters in your Eucalyptus cloud. And third, it could simply be an organizational policy reason why you want to define different clusters in your Eucalyptus cloud. From a technical standpoint, a cluster is a bunch of machines in the same broadcast domain. And every cluster has a front-end component called the cluster controller, which is also responsible for managing the nodes within the cluster. And these are the nodes that are the compute nodes in your cloud, kind of the workhorse machines, so to say, in your Eucalyptus cloud. And those are the node controller machines, which are going to be running some form of hypervisor, Xen or KVM or ESX or ESXi. A second cluster level component is called the storage controller, and storage controller is equivalent to Amazon's EBS or Elastic Block Store. And storage controller is the one which implements the Elastic Block Store functionality, including snapshotting, creating volumes, attaching and detaching volumes, and so on and so forth. And Walrus is equivalent to Amazon's S3, simple storage service in Amazon Web Services, Amazon AWS. And Walrus is the Eucalyptus component which implements S3-like functionalities. It's a bucket-based storage system. It's a put-get kind of a storage model where you can create buckets, put objects or get objects from these buckets, or create or delete buckets. Now, this distributed system, which is the Eucalyptus platform, is a distributed system. These components interact with each other using standard web service security mechanisms and project a cloud layer to the end user as well as for the administrator. To dig deeper into each of these components, first of all, the cloud controller, or the CLC, exposes an administrative interface for the administrators to be able to manage images. So the administrator can define what images needs to be visible to which user, enable or disable images. The administrator can define groups of users. Eucalyptus can seamlessly integrate with your existing Active Directory or LDAP, which means that Eucalyptus can import the notion of grouping and user associations from your existing user management systems. Or you can even define groups and users within Eucalyptus, and administrator, through the administrative interface that is exposed by the cloud controller, will be able to define groups and associate users with these groups. And as part of this interface, the administrator can also get access to detailed accounting and reporting information on storage utilization on a per group basis or on a per user basis, or VM utilization on a per group or even a per user basis. The administrator can also set quotas on how much resource can be used by which user or which groups of users, and where these resources come from which cluster do these come from. So all of this configurational and policy information can be ingressed into the Eucalyptus cloud through the administrative interface. And the cloud controller is also kind of the brain behind the cloud. It's responsible for resource provisioning and making scheduling decisions on an ongoing basis. The The cluster controller is the second component in your Eucalyptus cloud. And the cluster controller is the front end for every cluster. It's responsible for managing the nodes within a cluster. It's also responsible for managing the virtual network overlay within a cluster. So the CC, or the cluster controller, initiates a virtual network overlay, which the node controllers are the endpoint. The cluster controller is also responsible for mapping the public IP addresses to the private IP addresses, and is also responsible for aggregating the information about resource availability from different node controllers and sending it all the way up to the cloud controller. And finally, the node controller are the workhorse machines, which are going to be running some form of a hypervisor. It could be open source hypervisors like Xen or KVM, or proprietary hypervisors like ESX or ESXi. Eucalyptus can seamlessly overlay on top of your existing hypervisor environments, and node controller, it's a process that runs alongside your hypervisor in the case of Xen or KVM. And the node controller is responsible for downloading the images, for formatting the image in a specific format that is understandable by your hypervisor, and requesting the hypervisor to instantiate, terminate, or describe virtual machines. And that's also the virtual network endpoint in your Eucalyptus cloud. And finally, the two different storage abstractions in your Eucalyptus cloud. There are two different persistent storage abstractions in the cloud, and storage controller is one such cluster level component. So every cluster in a Eucalyptus cloud has a component called the storage controller, and storage controller implements the Amazon Web Services Elastic Block Store functionality, or the EBS functionality. And just like it is in Amazon AWS, volumes, or EBS volumes, or Elastic Block Store volumes, when created in Eucalyptus cloud, the visibility is constrained to a particular cluster. And again, you can attach an EBS volume to a single instance. They cannot be shared across multiple virtual machine instances, but you can definitely take snapshots of the EBS volume, and the snapshots become instantaneously available across different clusters in the cloud. And storage controller is responsible for creating volumes, deleting volumes, attaching or detaching volumes. That Elastic Block Store functionality is implemented by storage controller. And the second cloud level component is called the Walrus, which is equivalent to Amazon's S3, simple storage service. Walrus is an in-house on-premise implementation of Amazon's S3. It exposes an S3 interface, both the REST as well as the SOAP interfaces. The architecture is slightly different when you overlay a Eucalyptus cloud on top of your existing VMware-based environment. Eucalyptus can seamlessly overlay on top of your ESX or ESXi environment and transform your VMware-based hypervisor environment into an Amazon AWS-like on-premise private cloud. Eucalyptus also takes care of transforming the EMIs, or the Eucalyptus machine images, into a VMDK format and instantiate virtual machines on your ESX-based environment. In the case of the integration of Eucalyptus with VMware-based hypervisors, Eucalyptus does not run any component on your ESX or ESXi machines. On the other hand, we have a component called the VMware Broker that runs alongside the component cluster controller. And the VMware Broker is responsible for communicating with the ESX or ESXi machines, and we typically use the vSphere API to manage the ESX machines. If you have a vCenter server, we can make use of the vCenter server to communicate and manage your ESX machines, but vCenter server is not required to transform your ESX or ESXi based machines into an Amazon AWS-like on-premise private cloud. Eucalyptus can directly communicate with your ESX or ESXi machines and expose a cloud layer on top of your VMware-based hypervisor environment. To quickly summarize on the different components of the cloud, the Eucalyptus cloud, we have a couple of components that comprise the cloud level components, and a couple of them can be classified as cluster level components. The cloud controller and Walrus, where cloud controller is the Amazon EC2 equivalent, and the Walrus is equivalent to Amazon's S3. So these are the two cloud level components, which means that you will have one such component per cloud. And your Eucalyptus cloud itself could be sliced into multiple clusters, and every cluster has two components that are at the cluster level: the cluster controller, which is the front end to your cluster, and the storage controller, which is the Amazon's Elastic Block Store or the Amazon EBS implementation in a Eucalyptus cloud. These are cluster level components, and you can have multiple such clusters in a Eucalyptus cloud. And finally, the node controller are the processes that are going to be running alongside your hypervisors in the case of Xenar KVM, and these are going to be running on the machines which are the compute nodes in your Eucalyptus cloud.